Picture this: a boy is declared dead not once, but 3 times. Then, he comes back to life in a miraculous way. When he opens his eyes, he brings not only a second chance, but also a message. This message is so profound, so surprising, that it could only come from a place beyond our earthly existence, a place we all wonder if there is, a place we hope to reach, but rarely hear direct messages from. This is the story of Lawnful, a boy who came to the edge of life and death, crossed into the unknown, and returned with an urgent warning: you need to hear what Jesus told him. If you've ever wondered about an afterlife or what happens when you die, this story contains the answers you've been looking for. Get ready for a journey that defies logic. It will destroy your doubts and take you straight to the heart of the mystery. It all began in 1997. The Flea family, like many others, valued the time they spent together on weekends. On weekends, they had a simple, comforting routine: church in the morning, lunch at home, and a quiet afternoon of rest. That particular Sunday seemed like just another day. Julie Flea, a devoted mother, was with her husband as they drove along the familiar roads. In the back seat, her son, Lon, watched the scenery from the window, oblivious to the unexpected destination that awaited them just a few minutes away. Story touches your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion is important and can help other people find comfort and hope. Send this video to someone special who you believe needs to hear this. Spread this message together. Testimony of faith and love. The sun was shining intensely, filling the car with a golden light. Serena was supposed to be a peaceful journey home, but everything changed in the blink of an eye. Without warning, the calm was interrupted by the deafening sound of the sirens of an ambulance crossing an intersection. Andy Flea, at the wheel, had no time to react. The impact was devastating. The car was hit so hard that it spun out of control before coming to a stop. The sound of metal bending, glass shattering, and the shock left Julie disoriented, as if she were trapped in a nightmare. When the vehicle finally came to a halt, the impact was devastating. The car was hit so hard that it spun out of control before coming to a stop. The sound of metal bending, glass shattering, and the shock left Julie disoriented, as if she were trapped in a nightmare. When the vehicle finally came to a halt, silence overtook the place, interrupted only by the distant sound of sirens. The first rescuers who arrived at the scene were faced with a scene of destruction. The car was unrecognizable, crushed by the force of the collision. Andy did not resist and had his life taken instantly. Julie, although seriously injured, she was still alive, trapped among the wreckage. Rescuers worked frantically to pull her out of the twisted metal. They also turned their attention to London, whose small body lay motionless in the back seat. London was not breathing. His condition was critical. He was rushed to the nearest hospital. While paramedics struggled to keep him alive, his pulse was almost non-existent. Despite the paramedics' efforts, London was declared dead on arrival. The medical team had done everything they could, but there was no sign of life. His short journey on Earth had come to an end. Meanwhile, Julie was still recovering from her injuries when she was informed of Andy's death. The devastating news hit her like a physical blow. But even in the midst of her grief, she refused to believe that she would also lose her son. She clung to the hope that her little boy would survive. The battle for London's life continued. He had 2 more cardiac arrests. The doctors declared him dead twice more, and twice more they managed to bring him back. With each cardiac arrest, he crossed over to the other side. It was as if invisible forces pulled him between 2 worlds while the medical team fought tirelessly to keep him alive. Each cardiac arrest brought him closer to the brink of death. Medical teams fought to save him, but the doctors' faces showed their frustration and exhaustion. They tried to stay focused, but their despair was clear. Despite their efforts, it seemed impossible to save him. July felt overwhelmed by fear and sadness. She prayed with all her might, not with words but with deep, primal cries, begging God to save her son. Her son, please God, she whispered between tears. Don't take him away from me. Not him. For the doctors, the question was time. London's chances were minimal. Even if he lived, they feared he would suffer brain damage. The possibility of someone being declared dead 3 times and surviving without catastrophic consequences challenged not only science, but also hope. As Lon's heart stopped and started beating again, Julie refused to give up. She knew her son's spirit was stronger than his frail body, which now depended on machines to survive. She knew that the doctor's question was not about time, but about London's chances. The doctors feared that even if he lived, he would suffer brain damage. The possibility that someone could be declared dead 3 times and survive without catastrophic consequences challenged not only science, but also hope. As London's heart stopped and started beating again, it was as if the line between life and death became thinner. He continued on a journey that no one could fully understand. The doctors prepared Julie for the worst. If London woke up, they explained that it was possible that he would never be the same boy she knew. He could be trapped in a fragmented version of himself with erased memories and an unrecognizable personality. Predictions Julie refused to accept. Heart, she believed that her son's spirit was stronger than the frail body that now depended on machines to survive. Julie clung to the small hope that her son would return to her not as a shadow of the boy she loved, but as the son that he had always been. The hours turned into days, and days into weeks. London remained in an unconscious coma, connected to machines that kept his body working. Julie stayed by his side, holding his small hand, as if the touch could bring him back from the abyss. The medical team closely monitored his condition, but their gazes revealed deep doubts. They had seen cases like this before, and the outcomes were rarely positive. Lon's story was unique. While his body remained motionless, tied to tubes and monitors, his spirit soared. He would later describe this experience as if he had been lifted from his physical body, leaving behind the sterile hospital bed and being transported to a place that words could hardly describe. He found himself in a field of light, a place so serene and extraordinary that it seemed like a dream, but with a vividness that he had never experienced before. Senses heightened, colors more vibrant, sounds more harmonious, and an overwhelming sense of peace. London struggled to put this experience into words, but he was certain of one thing: he was in heaven. He remembered seeing roads paved with gold that shone brightly. London couldn't put it into words, but he was certain that he had crossed into heaven. He remembered seeing roads paved with gold that shone brightly, radiating light from the inside out. The air was filled with an ethereal glow, not coming from a sun, but from the place itself. It was as if everything around was made of light and love. Then he saw them bathed in a soft golden light. They weren't strangers, they were people with whom he felt a deep connection. Even without immediately recognizing all faces, he realized that he was surrounded by family members who had left long before he was born. This was a shocking revelation. But at that moment, it felt completely natural, as if he had always known them. Among these figures were 2 small children who greeted him with warm smiles. Lon was confused. He couldn't identify who they were, but their presence was comforting and familiar. Later, he would discover the truth: they were his siblings, lost in miscarriages before his birth. Birth was something his parents had never mentioned, something he had no way of knowing, and yet there they were, receiving him with pure love. Lon immediately recognized the figure, even though he had never seen it before. It was Jesus. The warm smiles of the two small children were reassuring. Lon was confused, but he felt a sense of comfort and familiarity. He would later discover the truth: they were his siblings, lost in miscarriages before his birth. Birth was something his parents had never mentioned, something he had no way of knowing. And yet there they were, receiving him with unconditional love. Then he saw a figure different from all the others. It seemed to radiate light from the inside out, brighter than anything he had ever seen. Lon knew who it was, even though he had never seen this person in life. It was Jesus. There was no need for introductions. Recognition was instantaneous, filling London with a deep sense of reverence and awe. Jesus looked not with judgment, but with love. So love that brought tears to Lon's eyes at that moment. All fear disappeared. London felt an immediate and profound connection to this figure, who radiated a light that seemed to transcend physical form. Though he had never encountered this person in his life, London recognized Jesus immediately. There was no need for introductions, recognition was instantaneous. Jesus' presence filled London with a deep sense of reverence and awe. His gaze was not filled with judgment, but with unconditional love, and it brought tears to London's eyes. All fear, doubt, and earthly pain seemed to dissipate in that moment. Jesus did not speak in the conventional sense. His words resonated directly in London's soul. He conveyed a message that the boy would never forget, a message that would change the course of his life forever. Jesus told him that it was not yet his time. He had a mission, to spread a message of hope and faith so that people would know that heaven is real, that life continues beyond death, and that every person has a purpose. London felt an overwhelming sense of acceptance. He didn't want to leave that place. It was as if he had found the true meaning of home, but he knew he needed to return, even if it meant returning to a world. London had a mission, to return to Earth and spread a message of hope and faith. People needed to know that heaven is real, that life continues beyond death, and that every person has a purpose. London felt an overwhelming sense of acceptance in that place. He didn't want to leave. He had found the true meaning of home. But he knew he had to return, even if it meant returning to a world full of pain and suffering. In an instant, the vision disappeared. London felt as if an invisible force was pulling him through a tunnel of light and warmth. When he opened his eyes, he was greeted by the fluorescent light of the hospital room. He had returned from a place that many only dream of seeing, a place that millions of people pray to know. When his time came, the doctors and nurses rushed to his side. London was in a lot of pain and suffering. He felt like he was being pulled by an invisible force through a tunnel of light and warmth. When he opened his eyes, the fluorescent light of the hospital room greeted him. He had returned from a place that many only dream of seeing, a place that millions of people pray to know. When his time came, the doctors and nurses rushed to his side. Their expressions showed shock and disbelief. After everything his body had been through, after being declared dead 3 times, London was awake. He was fully aware and beginning to speak as the initial impact subsided. The medical team rushed to assess his condition. They had predicted severe brain damage, the loss of basic functions, or at the very least, memory problems. But London defied all the gloomy predictions. He recognized his mother immediately, squeezing his side, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. After everything his body had been through, after being declared dead 3 times, London was awake. He was fully aware and beginning to speak as the initial impact subsided. The medical team rushed to assess his condition. They had predicted severe brain damage, the loss of basic functions, or at the very least, memory problems. But Lon defied all the gloomy predictions. He recognized his mother immediately, squeezing her hand with surprising strength for his frail appearance. Julie wept with relief as she held her son's hand. London was not just a miraculous survivor. He was living proof of something much greater, something that was yet to be revealed. Tears streamed down Julie's face as she realized that her prayers had been answered. Her son had returned to her, not as a shadow of himself, but as the boy she knew and loved. It was like witnessing a miracle. Julie couldn't believe it. London was alive. She couldn't fully understand it, but she was grateful. London began to speak, his voice hoarse after weeks of silence. He described his experiences, recounting the sights and sounds of heaven. He spoke of golden roads of angels and a sense of overwhelming peace. When London mentioned meeting his two brothers, he described them clearly, detailing their appearances and how warmly they had been received. Julie's heart soared. She had never told London about her miscarriages. Miscarriages was a painful chapter that she had chosen to keep to herself. How could he know about it? Yet here he was, speaking with a certainty that left her speechless. Doctors were perplexed. They had already received reports of near-death experiences before, but nothing. London's detailed descriptions of people and events that he had no way of knowing raised more questions than answers. There was no scientific explanation for what he was saying. It was clear that something extraordinary had happened to Julie. Her son was alive, and his words carried a message of hope. Doctors were baffled. They had already heard about near-death experiences before, but nothing. London's detailed descriptions of people and events that he had no way of knowing raised more questions than answers. There was no scientific explanation for what he was saying, but it was clear that something extraordinary had happened to Julie. Her son was alive, and his words carried a message of hope. But the loss of her still weighed heavily on her heart. It was a pain that no miracle could erase. In the days and weeks that followed, London continued to defy all medical expectations. He regained his strength faster than anyone could imagine, and his mind was sharp even while his body was still healing from his wounds. London began to share his story with anyone willing to listen. First, he spoke to his family. Then, he spoke to doctors. Eventually, he spoke to friends and even strangers. He spoke with a conviction that transcended his age. The loss of her still weighed heavily on her heart, but she refused to let it destroy her. In the days and weeks that followed, Lon defied all medical expectations by rapidly regaining his strength and maintaining his sharp mind, even as his body healed from his wounds. London began to share his story with anyone willing to listen. First, he spoke to his family, then to doctors, and eventually to friends and even strangers. He spoke with a conviction that transcended his age. People from all over came to hear him talk about heaven, ask questions, and find comfort in his words. Although he was still a child, London carried the message with a calmness and assurance that brought peace to those who heard him. He conveyed what Jesus had told him, that heaven is real, that life does not end with death, and that there is a divine purpose for each one of us. Heaven is a place of light and love where we will be reunited with those we have lost. London was both a gift and a burden. He knew he had been given a second chance to share what he had seen. This gift came with the weight of knowing he had glimpsed a world beyond this one. It was a place infinitely more beautiful than ours. He accepted this mission with grace, driven by a sense of purpose. He had never felt such a sense of purpose before. He had seen the face of Jesus, felt the love of heaven, and knew that his task was to tell the world of London's return from the brink of death. When he began to share the message he had received from Jesus, the true impact of his experience became clear. He recounted what had happened. He was weak, lying in a hospital bed. His voice was barely more than a whisper, yet the power behind his words was undeniable. He chose his words carefully, as if each sentence carried weight. Jesus told me it wasn't my time yet. Time yet, London explained, looking directly into his mother's eyes, as if that message was for her and everyone else. He said that I had a mission to go back and tell people about him. I had to tell them that heaven is real and that we have a purpose beyond this life. For Julie to hear her son talk like that was surreal. Listening to someone much older, someone who had seen more of the world than any child could, boy, she knew before the accident, was curious, playful, and full of energy. But this new Lon carried a wisdom and solemnity that went beyond his age. Lon's new demeanor was intriguing. He seemed to have a profound understanding of life, one that surpassed his years. It was as if he had undergone a fundamental transformation due to his experiences on the other side. Jewel found herself contemplating the reasons behind Jesus' choice of his son, the significance of Lon's message, and its implications for their lives moving forward. As London's story unfolded, the reactions were diverse. Many were deeply inspired by her miraculous recovery and the message of hope she embodied in a world filled with uncertainty and doubt. Jewel couldn't help but wonder why Jesus had chosen his son. Why had Lon received that message? What would it mean for their lives going forward as London's story spread? Reactions varied. Many people were deeply inspired by her miraculous recovery and the message of hope in a world full of uncertainty and doubt. Uncertainty and doubt were dispelled by his testimony. People who had lost loved ones found comfort in his words, clinging to the belief that there really is a place where we will be reunited with those we love. Churches began to invite him to speak, and soon he was sharing his story with congregations, community groups, and anyone who would listen. Despite his young age, he spoke with the conviction of someone who had lived a lifetime. His testimony was undeniable. People who had lost loved ones found comfort in his words, clinging to the belief that there really is a place where we will be reunited. Churches began to invite him to speak, and soon he was sharing his story with congregations, community groups, and anyone who would listen. Despite his young age, he spoke with the conviction of someone who had lived a lifetime. His voice carried a confidence that seemed to come from a place far beyond his earthly existence. However, not everyone was ready to believe. Skeptics questioned the authenticity of London's experience, suggesting that his visions could be the result of an oxygen-deprived brain or hallucinations caused by trauma. Yet London remained steadfast, sharing his message without question. He knew what he had seen, and that certainty was enough to continue his mission. He confidently pointed to scientific explanations for near-death experiences, citing studies linking these visions to chemical changes in the brain. To skeptics, London's experiences were nothing more than products of an overloaded imagination, desperately trying to make sense of a traumatic event. However, no matter how many theories were presented, London's story never changed. He didn't argue or try to convince anyone, he just shared what he had seen and felt, leaving others to draw their own conclusions. Julie, for her part, was in the midst of a storm of emotions. She was grateful for her son's survival, but she struggled with an emptiness caused by the loss of her husband. And he had been a loving father, and she couldn't understand why God had taken him away while giving Lon back to her. Lon was with her when she was alone with her thoughts, and she asked herself, why did God save her son but not her husband? There were no easy answers, and Julie needed all her strength to reconcile her pain with her faith. Time changed her perspective. She realized that her anger and confusion were natural parts of the grieving process, but they didn't have to define her. London's words resonated deeply within her, particularly when he spoke of the overwhelming love and peace she experienced in heaven. This kind of comfort eluded her as she grappled with the events that had transpired. Gradually, Julie came to accept the possibility of a greater plan behind the events that had unfolded. Julie found strength in her prayers, no longer said in desperation but as a way of connecting with the divine in a way she had never experienced before. London's experience opened a door in her heart, allowing her to find solace in the belief that Andy was at peace in a place of love. Exactly as her son had described, this belief began to heal wounds she hadn't even known were there, giving her a new sense of purpose and acceptance. London's journey was far from over. Her recovery was long and painful, but she persevered. London's body bore scars from the accident, visible reminders of the trauma he had faced. He had undergone physiotherapy, surgeries, and moments of deep frustration, yet he faced these challenges with a quiet determination. He possessed a strength that went beyond physical endurance, rooted in his experience on the other side. He never complained about pain or the difficulties. Instead, he focused on the mission he had been given. He faced challenges, including physiotherapy, surgeries, and moments of deep frustration. His body bore scars from the accident, visible reminders of the trauma he had faced. Yet London faced these challenges with a quiet determination. He possessed a strength that went beyond physical endurance. His strength was rooted in his experience on the other side. He never complained about pain or difficulties. Instead, he focused on the mission he had been given. He took every opportunity to share his story and spread the message of hope and faith that he believed it was his duty to pass on. Over the years, London began to speak to larger audiences, sharing his testimony in churches, schools, and conferences. He was no longer just the boy who survived a terrible accident. He had become a messenger. London boldly took every opportunity to share his story and spread the message of hope and faith that he was duty-bound to pass on. Over the years, he began speaking to larger audiences, sharing his testimony in churches, schools, and conferences. He was no longer just the boy who survived a terrible accident. He had become a messenger, a symbol of something much greater than himself. He stood before hundreds or thousands of people, recounting his experience with a humility and sincerity that touched the hearts of all who heard him. London didn't just talk about the beauty of heaven, he also talked about the love he felt from Jesus, a love so pure and unconditional that it made him cry every time. For many, London's story became a source of comfort. People who had lost loved ones found solace in his words. His words were undeniable proof that their loved ones were safe and happy in the afterlife. Even skeptics were forced to question their disbelief, touched by the sincerity of his testimony. Julie watched her son with a mixture of pride and admiration. She had always known that London was special, but she could never have predicted his life path. She saw how London's message brought healing to others, giving them hope and helping them rediscover their faith. Julie witnessed London's faith in action, and it healed her. Every time she heard him speak, she felt her sadness turn into peace. She saw a bigger picture unfold before her eyes, a divine plan where every thread, even the most painful ones, had a purpose. London understood that his life had changed forever because of his experience, and he embraced this change wholeheartedly. He knew that his mission was not just to tell people what he had seen. Julie's faith in him helped her heal. Every time she heard London speak, her sadness turned into peace. She saw a bigger picture unfold before her eyes, a divine plan where every thread, even the most painful, had a purpose. London knew his life had changed forever because of his experience, and he embraced this change wholeheartedly. His mission was not just to tell people what he had seen, but to live in a way that reflected the love and light he experienced in heaven. He made it his mission to help others rediscover their faith and remind them that there is always hope, even in the darkest times. He saw himself as a bridge between two worlds, carrying a message of love and safety from one to the other. As long as he had breath, he would continue telling his story, fulfilling the mission Jesus had given him that day in heaven. London's story isn't just about the boy who came back from the dead, it's about a message that transcends time and space. It speaks to the heart of what it means to be human. We are all part of something bigger, and our lives have a meaning beyond what we can see. Those who listen to London's words and take them to heart will see life, death, and everything in between differently. Everything in between inspired this story. Like and share this video. Your interaction helps this story reach more people who need comfort and hope. Keep following incredible stories like this. Subscribe to the channel and activate the Tinkerbell so you don't miss anything new.